All right, let's just jump right in with a pretty wild idea. What if the reality we all live in, the economy, our governments, even our own sense of who we are, isn't solid at all? What if it's more like an operating system, a piece of code that can be written, rewritten, and maybe even hacked? Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating collection of sources that explore this exact concept, the architecture of reality itself.
And this, right here, is the question that's going to guide us through this whole thing. The material we're looking at suggests that reality is basically a shared narrative, a story we all agree to believe in. So, if that's true, then the ultimate power, well, it's having control of that story. We're going to look at who might be trying to grab that pen, and more importantly, how you might be able to write a few lines for yourself.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on this idea of reality as a shared code. Then, we'll check out the external forces that are actively trying to write that code for us, and the internal backdoors they use to get inside our heads. After that, we'll look at two very different ways people have responded to all this, and we'll wrap up with a kind of toolkit for taking back control.
Okay, so first things first, what are we even talking about when we say shared reality? The sources call this consensus reality. It's this incredibly complex system that's built not so much on the laws of physics, but on the things we all collectively agree are true.
This right here is the perfect way to think about it. I mean, look at money. It's just pieces of paper, or, numbers on a screen. But it runs the entire planet because we all believe it has value. That collective faith is literally the glue holding the system together. And the sources argue that it's not just money, it's laws, social etiquette, the whole shebang. It's all built on this foundation of belief. And when that belief starts to crack, the whole structure can get real shaky real fast.
So this leads to a pretty logical and maybe a little scary next thought. If reality is just a shared agreement, well, you can bet there are groups out there trying to steer that agreement to their advantage. This next section digs into these so-called architects, the people who are trying to write the code of our reality for us.
And you can actually see how their methods have evolved over time. The sources map out this progression, from the really direct, frankly brutal psychological experiments of things like the CIA's MKUltra program back in the 50s, to what philosophers in the 90s started calling societies of control, where it's not about walls and guards, but about subtly shaping our behavior through endless streams of data. And then you have modern-day proposals like Project 2025, which is laid out as a massive top-down blueprint for completely re-engineering the system. The tools change, but the objective, it stays the same: control.
But how do they actually do it? How do you change belief on a mass scale? The sources point to this incredibly powerful, kind of strange concept called hyperstition. You can think of it like a self-fulfilling prophecy on steroids. It's a fictional idea, a story, that once it spreads and enough people start to believe it, it literally begins to rewrite reality. It's an idea that becomes an engine for its own creation. It hacks the system.
So, for a really current example, the sources introduce this mysterious group called ZerOwOrk. Now, according to the material, these guys use hyperstition as their main tool. Their big idea? To destabilize the financial system by spreading the belief that all digital money could just be redistributed. And that symbol, that glitched out zero, it's described as more than a logo. It's a sigil, a kind of visual virus designed to spread online, to plant itself in the back of our minds, and to subtly change what we think is possible.
Okay, let's get into this next part, because for any of that external control stuff to actually work, it has to find a way in. It has to hack our internal operating system. It has to hack our minds.
This quote is, well, it's everything. It comes from a plastic surgeon, of all people, Maxwell Maltz. His work in what he called Psycho-Cybernetics showed that our mind basically works like a goal-seeking missile. You give it a target, a belief, and it just goes. And the wild part is, it doesn't care if that target is based on a real memory or something you just imagined really, really vividly. This creates a huge vulnerability. It means our internal reality can be programmed.
And here's the backdoor. The source is pulled from the psychologist Carl Jung, who argued that we all share this collective unconscious, full of what he called archetypes, these ancient universal patterns like the hero, the trickster, the great mother. When a story or an idea taps into one of these archetypes, it can trigger this deep, gut-level feeling of rightness that completely bypasses our rational brain. It's a cheat code to our belief system.
So, we've seen how reality can be built, controlled, and hacked from the inside out. Given all that, what do? Well, the sources present us with two fundamentally different, and let's be honest, pretty extreme answers to that question. A serious fork in the road.
On one side, you've got the perspective of someone like Ted Kaczynski, who saw the whole industrial technological system as an absolute disaster for human freedom and argued it had to be destroyed. Basically, smash the machine to save humanity. Then, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have this group of thinkers from the 90s called the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, or CCRU for short. Their view was that the system is basically turning into a giant planetary AI, and you can't stop it. So, their solution? Hit the accelerator. Push capitalism and tech so hard and so fast that it triggers a meltdown and becomes something totally new, something post-human. In their view, humanity is just the starter motor for whatever comes next.
Now, after all of that heavy diagnosis of the problem, the sources don't just leave us there. They pivot towards solutions, offering a really powerful toolkit of strategies, not just for resistance, but for genuine liberation. Basically, counter-hacks to take back some of that control.
What's so great here is that these tactics aren't about some grand, violent revolution. They're way more subtle. The sources pull from things like the old OSS Simple Sabotage Manual. It's about using the system's own weight and complexity against itself, forcing a bureaucracy to tie itself in knots just by politely asking for clarification, or practicing what's called interpretive disobedience, which is just a principled way of saying, nope, I'm going to follow the plain meaning of this rule, not your twisted version of it. It's about finding the cracks in the system and applying a little bit of pressure.
But okay, beyond just fighting the external systems, there's the internal path. And the ultimate goal there, according to the sources, is to achieve what the ancient Greeks called gnosis. It means a direct, intuitive knowing of reality, a way of seeing the world that isn't colored by all the filters of our culture, our language, and our own personal baggage.
And this is where things get really fascinating. This idea reframes things like shamanism or deep meditation. The theory here is that our brain isn't so much a generator of consciousness as it is a transceiver, like a biological radio. And most of the time, it's tuned to a very narrow frequency, the reality channel we need to survive, to pay bills, to not walk into traffic. But the suggestion is that it's possible through certain practices to retune that antenna, to start picking up on a much wider band of information, to perceive these deeper, more complex layers of reality.
Which brings us right back to where we began. We've walked through this world where reality is code, where powerful forces are trying to write that code, and where our own minds have vulnerabilities that can be exploited. But we've also seen that there are tools for liberation, ways to fight back, and ways to see more clearly. So I'll just leave you with this final thought. If the story of reality is being written in every single moment, the biggest takeaway from all these sources is that the pen might be a lot closer than you think. The real question is, what story are you going to write?